Meanwhile, in the Trump administration, military resources continue to make news for other reasons. As the New York Times reports today that Treasury Secretary and top Trump fundraiser Steve Mnuchin has charged taxpayers more than $800,000 for him to fly on military aircraft since he was sworn in as Secretary of the Treasury. He's not in the military. He's the Treasury Secretary. But still, taxpayers have paid $800,000 for him to travel multiple times, many multiples of times, on military jets, which have apparently become his preference. Shortly after Secretary Mnuchin withdrew his request to have the taxpayers pay for a military jet to take him on his European honeymoon with his new bride, shortly after that, you will recall that Mr. Mnuchin did famously take his new bride on a military jet on the day of the eclipse to Fort Knox, Kentucky. Secretary Mnuchin said he needed to inspect the gold at Fort Knox. Okay. Well, now, thanks to a new report from the Treasury's Inspector General, we know what it cost the taxpayers for Steve Mnuchin to take that trip specifically on a military jet. Taxpayers paid $27,000 just for his flight that day. And now we know why Steve Mnuchin couldn't fly commercial that day to go inspect the gold, why he needed taxpayers to fork out $27 grand for him and his bride to make the trip on a military jet. According to his travel request, which we can now see in this Inspector General report, Steve Mnuchin demanded that he have a military jet for that trip, quote, in the event that the secretary's participation on a call during travel arises. So he asked for a military jet because at some point during that trip, there was the possibility he might want to make a phone call. Or maybe somebody would want to call him. He's very important. It could happen. People call him. So that was in August. In June, we now know that Secretary Mnuchin also used a military jet to fly himself from Washington, D.C. to Miami. Taxpayers paid $43,000 for his plane ride that day because, again, he demanded that taxpayers pay to fly him on a military jet. Now, we now know from this Inspector General report that when Secretary Mnuchin made that demand for the $43,000 military flight to Miami, the Treasury's travel office wrote back to him, specifically wrote to his assistant to tell him, you know, a commercial ticket for this flight is $688, right? Right. But why have taxpayers spend only $688 on you when you can have taxpayers spend $43,000 on you instead? $688 was round trip, by the way. Steve Mnuchin's chief qualification for becoming Treasury Secretary appears to have been that he was the Trump campaign's fundraising director during the campaign. With this Inspector General report today, we now know that he has basically continued to raise large sums of money now for the Trump administration. It's just that now he's raising that money for himself, and he's raising it from the taxpayers. And taxpayers just have to eat it, because that's what this administration is like now. There's also news today that the Campaign Legal Center has filed a complaint with the Justice Department over Trump's Interior Secretary, Ryan Zinke, and the taxpayer-funded private jet travel he took to the Virgin Islands this spring. No, not related to the hurricanes, way before the hurricanes hit. The private jet trip that taxpayers paid for Ryan Zinke was for a trip to the Virgin Islands that included a snorkeling tour for him and his attendance at a Republican Party fundraiser, where people appear to have been invited to make Republican Party campaign donations in exchange for the honor of taking a picture with the Secretary of the Interior. And if that is true about that fundraiser, that would be illegal. So the Campaign Legal Center has asked the Justice Department to look at that. Separate and apart from the bit about him flying to and from that fundraiser and the snorkeling tour on multiple private jets paid for by the taxpayers. And that does happen to be exactly the same scandal that caused the resignation of the Health Secretary, Tom Price, just last week. But maybe this week, people don't resign over that anymore.